With generative AI has been consumerized before it's been corporatized. I call it the iPhone moment for AI has happened.
How and in which ways can organizations go about implementing it?
What has happened with generative AI or LLMs in general is I almost call like the invention of something as significant as the internal combustion engines.
How can corporate leaders go about empowering their employees in the best possible way that they are using generative AI tools for their work?
Generative AI is just another in a line of disruptive technologies that shake up how our personal lives and our business lives work.
As an industry leader yourself, have you ever heard this from junior employees, colleagues that, sir, is our job in danger because of AI? What are some of the common AI misconceptions that industry leaders should be aware of? Arvind, welcome to this episode of Simulated Reality by A Media House. How are you? How have you been?
I'm doing great. Exciting to be here in India.
Lovely to have you here. I want to straight away jump to the very first question, something that I myself have had in my mind for quite some time now. Artificial intelligence is not brand new. It's been there, so much so that in the 90s, Steven Spielberg made a movie called Artificial Intelligence. What on earth happened in the last 2-3 years with AI and with generative AI that it is in every which way the talk of the town?
That is such an amazing question. I think we're all trying to figure this out. I think what's really happened is that with generative AI has been consumerized before it's been corporatized. And I'll explain what that means. I call it the iPhone moment for AI has happened. Why? Because if you go back 10, 15 years before smartphones were a thing, a lot of us in corporate IT were trying to explain to business leaders that there's an opportunity to create consumer applications and engage people, etc. It wasn't quite cutting through. But when the iPhone happened, suddenly they were using it, their kids were using it, their grandmoms were using it. They all had this gut feel, oh my God, this is going to change my business. And they invested in it and built a lot of apps, and look how the world has changed because of that. And I think same thing has been happening for the last 10 plus years before the ChatGPT moment happened, that we were all talking about big data and this AI and that, and it was some progress was happening. But when ChatGPT dropped, again, it consumerized it. Everyone was using it, the business leaders, their kids, their grandmoms, and again, they got this strong sense of in their gut that this is going to change my business. It's going to create efficiency, it's going to create consumer experience improvements, it's going to create new business models, and therefore they just want to move forward with this. Everyone gets it. You don't have to explain it. And there is therefore this pull and demand for it in businesses as well as in our personal lives, which is just unprecedented. This is one of those once in a 15 years things.
You mentioned the massive demand for it in businesses as well, rising by the year, by the month, by the fortnight, to be honest. How and in which ways can organizations go about implementing it in their day-to-day culture, in their workaday culture, in the best way possible?
I'd like to use an analogy in this case to explain, I think, how we should think about generative AI. What has happened with generative AI or LLMs in general is I almost call like the invention of something as significant as the internal combustion engine. So an engine has been invented, right? And now you don't sit on an engine and go somewhere, right? You need an engine to have wheels and transmission and gearbox and accelerator and brakes and lane assist and rear view mirror, all of those things. So to your question, I think what is important to understand is that this fabulous new engine has been created, and the big tech companies are investing a lot of money to build better and better and more powerful engines. But the engine by itself is not sufficient. And that's why we also see a lot of these stories about kind of things going out of control for folks, because those are examples of people just sitting on an engine and trying to go somewhere. It doesn't quite work that way. You need the rest of the environment, the chassis and the control systems that create a vehicle to go somewhere. Another aspect of the same analogy is you got to be really clear about what are you trying to do. Are you going to commute to work, or are you taking kids to the game, or are you trying to transport 50 people somewhere? The engine that you use, the kind of chassis that you use, all of those things have to be fit for purpose. Again, one of the challenges we see is people are trying to use the same kind of engine to do all kinds of purposes without fully thinking through what is the use case or the application needs. And therefore, what we end up talking a lot with folks is think about the purpose first. What are you trying to do? What engine with what cost to performance to weight ratios are best for your situation, and what is the rest of the environment that's needed to make it work for your situation? And there'll be all of those. There'll be a million different kinds of vehicles that can be run with an internal combustion engine, and all of those have to be created over time. So that's the piece which I think we've got to figure out beyond just the excitement about the LLM itself. It's all of the other stuff that puts it to use.
You've been in a leading position for multiple years now. As a leader yourself, I want to ask you, how can corporate leaders go about empowering their employees in the best possible way, that they are using generative AI tools for their work, but without the fear of job displacement?
See, the way I think of this, and the way I encourage everyone to think about this, is generative AI is just another in a line of disruptive technologies that shake up how our personal lives and our business lives work, right? And this is not the first one. It's not going to be the last one. There have been quite a few. The important thing really is to figure out a way to get people to recognize that this, if they figure out how to use it well, it's a huge advantage for them. This is something that will drive their careers forward and create new opportunities for them. But but also that this will also create disruptions, right? So in an environment like that, which one do you want to be? Do you want to be the person who takes advantage of something like this and uses this as a propellant for their careers and opportunities for themselves, or not? So therefore, it's important to be curious about this, to learn about it, to experiment with it, to see what works, what doesn't work, and kind of put yourself in a position where your previous experience pre-generative AI, which is kind of the new thing now, but your experiences before that came into this scene becomes why someone wants you to be part of the process to leverage generative AI in that situation. And I'll take an example for that. One of the previous companies I worked with, it was an insurance company, and we were transforming a customer service center. And this is pre-Gen AI even, right? And we had a customer service center that supported calls coming in, and we were always struggling with that. The number of calls were far too many. We couldn't service all of them. We were being selective about only being able to support our biggest customers. And even there, we were not really serving them in a way that was sufficient. So we put in an AI capability to improve, first of all, to help answer the simpler questions automatically. And then for the more complex one, gives a lot of support to the agents so they can answer those questions more easily. And in situations like that, it was interesting. There were a group of people who leaned into this and said, hey, I know how to train this thing. I can help you pick the relevant historical data that will help train this model to be more effective. And those are the folks who therefore got into the center of this. They learned a lot from it. And I mean, there were a few of our customer support agents who became chatbot trainers. And this is not just a one-time thing. They were involved on a weekly basis analyzing what kind of questions are coming in, which ones are being answered early and in a high-quality way, which ones need more training, what data can we pull out. And that became their new career. So it was just a great example. And as leaders, therefore, it was important for us to, even though they knew nothing about the AI, to say, you know about the business process. We want you to learn how AI can make this process better, rather than bring in someone from outside to do this to you. So we created those opportunities. Not everyone leaned into it, but the ones that did got a lot of support and training. And then very importantly, and my message to leaders is, when you do see situations like that, amplify it. make an example out of that. So we actually we did newspaper articles about this individual who had progressed from being a customer support agent to being a chatbot trainer. And that created this energy around this whole trend, and many more people came forward and said, hey, for your next project, I want to be the one who plays a role like this. So I think that's really important for leaders to take that position.
Arvind, that was a very fascinating story, especially about the fact where we got to know where somebody who has been working for so many years then ended up training chatbots themselves. Great story. I want to ask you, because this is a question that has come to me as well. We have talked about this question multiple times. As an industry leader yourself, have you ever heard this from junior employees, colleagues, that, sir, is our job in danger because of AI?
It is happening. A lot of people are having this in their mind, even if they're not vocalizing it. But I want to tell you a very personal story on this one. So my older son is in second year of college, learning computer science, and he is a geek. He's trying to get into programming. And we've had more than one occasion where he said, did I make a mistake going into this field? Because I don't see a future for myself.
Ouch.
Right? So here is how I think about it, okay? And there's a longer term view to this, and there's a shorter term view to it. The slightly longer term view to this, I see it is, if you think about it, software development is still like an artisanal craft, okay? Every piece of software that is created has someone's personal energy and thinking in it. It is like we're still making shoes by hand, is how the software industry works. The thing which I'm excited about is that with generative AI and coding assistants, etc., this is the opportunity for software development to go from an artisanal craft to an industrialized production model, right? What that will do is that in the immediate term, you may think, oh my God, that means massive job losses. But there's another dimension to this, which is the unit cost of software will go down dramatically. And if you look at industries, and I've been a CIO for so many years, the reality is, although we have a lot of technology in organizations, I would say 50% of the work still happens on Excel and emails and Slack messages, right? Why is that the case? It's because there is not sufficient software actually out there that touches all of the business scenarios and cases. And humans are still intervening and connecting the dots so many places. What reduced unit costs of software will do is lead to an explosion in the demand for software, because it will be much easier to create and, even more importantly, to maintain and modify software to match the evolving needs of businesses. We are not even scratching the surface of that opportunity. So yes, the unit cost will go down, the number of software developers needed per million lines of code will go down, but the number of millions and billions of lines of code that will actually start existing will explode. And that will create a large amount of employment as well, I think. So I think, it all depends on how soon we get to that, but there are these two opposing forces. One that's reducing the number of people needed per unit, per line of code, but the number of lines of code are exploding. So in the long term, I think there is going to be a huge demand for people to run these industrialized production shops for software, and much more software to happen. So that's what makes me very, very optimistic about this. This is about software, but in other fields as well, there's a similar challenge with creative fields and people creating copy for advertising. I think there'll be a lot more personalized advertising out there. So it remains to be seen how the balance of this will be, but I feel this is just like many other innovations that have happened in the past. I think for humanity, this is a positive force.
I hope that the elder son was also satisfied with the answer.
No, he was not.
He wasn't?
Not at all. That's too far out. I care about the job scene 2 years from now, so nobody can predict that. We'll see. We'll see.
You mentioned the job scene. I want to ask you a question which pertains to something that is talked about so often, and that is performance review. Starting from your first interview to your 10th interview, performance review is something that is talked about. I want to ask you, as an industry leader yourself, when industry leaders are doing, in simple words, they're doing a performance review of their employees, in which best way can this differentiation be done as to how much of the performance results were AI driven and how much of it was the employee herself or himself?
Okay, my thinking on this is, do you today in your performance evaluation say, so much of my performance was because I had access to office solutions,
True.
or laptops, or a phone, or I had a mobile phone? We don't, right? To me, AI is just another one of those tools. So I don't think we need to separate that out. I don't think so. What matters end of the day is, at an individual level, what impact am I making on business? And the smarter folks and the ones who will be rewarded more are the ones who figure out all of the tools that are available to me and make good use of that at the right time for the right problems. So end of the day, it's still what it boils down to is what impact am I making? Not how much of that was because of this tool or that tool. It's just a tool.
You know, what you said instantly reminds me of this one quote that I read on the first day that I joined AIM Media House. In one of the desks, there's this quote written where your job will not be replaced by AI, but maybe somebody who uses AI better.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that.
Absolutely. I want to ask you, what are some of the common AI misconceptions that industry leaders should be aware of?
So, and maybe we'll focus on genai because there's a lot of that going around right now. But for example, one of the biggest ones is that somehow this is going to steal your data. I think that is something which is going around a lot. And the reality is, what I would go back to is the conversation we had earlier. That end of the day, this is an engine, and there's a whole set of other supporting environment around that turns it into a usable vehicle, right? Now, some of those vehicles will be designed in a way that use that data, but that's what the chat GPTs of the world potentially could be, right? But the reality is that that's not an inherent feature of all AI. It is how you design your AI. Do you design your AI in a way that every piece of data it observes and is also uses to train itself? That's not the norm. That's the exception, right? So that's one misconception which is really holding people back, right? If you deploy LLMs in your own environment and you design that environment in a way that it only uses that to provide recommendation but does not use that to somehow leak information, then it won't do that, right? And therefore you need those kind of setups, the bedrock to create your solution in a way that doesn't make that possible. So that's one which is very, very commonly heard. Another very common sort of concern I hear is that it's too expensive, right? And the reason why that happens is because, again, we end up using the wrong engine in the wrong car. It is like putting the engine for a truck in a small sports car. It doesn't fit. Of course, it will consume too much fuel because you're just using something that's not fit for purpose. So with LLMs, there are so many LLMs now with very different price-performance ratio equations. So if you're trying to do document summarization, don't use the most complex and expensive LLM. Use one that is very lightweight, and all you need is the linguistic capabilities, not the inherent knowledge of the LLM, right? So those are some examples, a couple of them, which these are the two biggest ones I come across all the time.
You know, in the last few days and weeks, I've got the chance to speak to a lot of industry leaders, so many of them working at AWS itself. A couple of days back itself in Bangalore, I was talking to your colleague at AWS, Ishit.
Yeah.
And we got to talking about a lot of the very, very fascinating stuff, fascinating work, fascinating projects that is going on hand in hand with AWS and GenAI and other companies, one of them being F1, the latest car. So you have had about 9 months at AWS up until now. So if you can talk about some of those really exciting projects that you've got to know and some that are lined up as well.
So I talked about the fact that I spent some time in insurance in the past. So I'll talk about that story. We were trying to transform the whole claims process. And historically, the way it was done was you get these hospital bills, some people type it in, then a claims assessor figures out whether this is payable or not. 6-7 years ago, I did this project to transform that whole process and use what you would call traditional AI to do that, okay? OCR, and models which were doing mathematical statistical models mostly. It was so difficult to do that at that point in time because OCR needed to be exactly designed for different hospital bills. And even a small place like Singapore, with relatively limited number of hospitals, we ran into hundreds and probably thousands of different templates that had to be maintained all the time. Now with genai, we're now working with some insurance companies where there's no need for a templatized approach. You take any hospital bill and it can extract the relevant information from that. So this is just a very simple example of how things have improved dramatically now with genai versus the earlier ways we used to do these things.
I mean, I can just think off the top of my head, all the information that GenAI is taking from that one hospital bill and then converting it into data makes the follow-up meetings with the doctors and the follow-up appointments at the hospitals just so much easier for the people.
Dramatically easier, absolutely. And the decision-making process, you can figure out which hospital was this from, what was the diagnosis, what treatment was done, and then you can provide that structured data to other models that figure out whether this is a payable sickness, is the treatment covered, is there any exception, etc. So it makes downstream processing so much easier now with this.
Arvind, we're almost towards the end of the podcast. Before we end, I want to ask you one question that is pretty similar to the first question that I asked you. That was about what has happened in the last 2-3 years. How did this happen? But now I want to ask you, say if you want to look at the future, not very distant future, slightly near future, the next half a decade, the next decade, what roles, what do you think is possible? How much can happen when it comes to generative AI in the workplace?
You really call the next decade short-term future?
Half a decade. Half a decade.
Right. Okay, good. See, we talked about that this is the iPhone moment for AI, right? Now, think about that. Over the years, over the decade since the iPhone came out, how has this changed our lives, right? Today, you connect with your friends and family on the smartphone, you order your food, you learn, you plan your holidays, everything. It's changed our lives. We could not even imagine all of that stuff when the phone was launched, right? I think that's kind of what will happen over the next half a decade or decade, like you asked me. We cannot even imagine right now. But here are a few things that excite me. I'll take two, which absolutely blow my mind. The first one is in the area of education. Okay, I'm sure you will remember that teacher from your 5th grade or 7th grade who was really special, who took an interest in you, understood you, gave you exactly the stuff that made a difference to your learning and interest in that subject, and that's why you love whatever that subject was, math or history, etc. Right? But it's very rare. Why is it so rare? Because education is a scale problem, right? There are great teachers, but none of them have the capacity to understand every student at that level of granularity. It just sometimes the chemistry happens and that happens. It's special. With GenAI and the way AI is developing, I think every teacher can be like that special teacher for you. Why? Because through data and through extraction of this understanding, every teacher will be able to understand what your special interests are, what your talents are, what little nudges and training input you need to develop in that particular area. Imagine how that will change the lives of students who are entering the education system now. This is a very special point. I predict that kids who are entering the system now will have a completely different experience. Every teacher, every subject, every grade, they will have that special experience. And I believe that human potential will completely transform because people will be able to go in the direction that they're really good at, where their natural abilities are, and they will have all of the support and nourishment that's needed to develop into the areas that they're especially inclined towards. I think that's one area which completely blows my mind, right? Another one is healthcare.
Yeah.
Right? Which we kind of touched on earlier as well. Imagine today, same challenge, right? Doctors just don't have the capacity to understand all of the dynamics and all of the history of every patient. And they're trying to see a patient every 2 minutes. So if the doctor can very quickly understand all of the history and be in touch with every piece of research that is coming out and be able to recommend the right thing based on the latest research for every individual patient. Imagine the impact this will have on healthcare, right? So 2 examples. I think in the next 5 years for sure, 10 years guaranteed, healthcare and education will be a totally different space.
I mean, it's great that this is the second time that you mentioned healthcare. I just want to mention this one thing. I was talking to doctors, very senior doctors from AIMS, at the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence in Delhi earlier this year. And they were showing us models and they were showing us products that they have created where, with the help of AI, they are being able to detect breast cancer at the earliest of stages. And they said the earlier the detection, the better the chances of cure.
Absolutely.
And they're doing that in other forms of cancer as well right now. So yes,
Yep.
healthcare.
And we can go down this into a lot of drug research is being improved, patient histories are being improved, preventive healthcare is being improved. So across the entire spectrum of healthcare, I think there's just incredible opportunity.
Incredible opportunity indeed. AWS themselves doing such path-breaking work in so many of these industries. Arvind, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, to get your time. Thank you so much. How was the podcast for you?
Wonderful chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arvind. Guys, do leave in the comments, how did you like this, a podcast episode of Simulated Reality by A Media House? This is me, your friend Korak. See you in the next one.